There would have been a time in my life where I would have thought, kind of along the lines, that you should apply a singular standard of evidence to everything, that you should have the same standard of evidence, the same level of skepticism for everything. And I don't, well, I guess maybe I don't necessarily disagree. Well, it'd be true to say I think that you shouldn't be arbitrary or hypocritical in your application of skepticism, but neither do I think it's entirely incongruous to apply different levels of skepticism to different circumstances. After all, a schizophrenic whose brain is on the fritz has to apply a high degree of skepticism to their own conceptualizations because everything that's going on in their head is really messed up. To be fair, like they would have to apply a higher degree of skepticism to their own inner workings than anyone would maybe have to do to anything else in their normal everyday lives. A person who is on the battlefield and applies a certain degree of skepticism, who's very tactically aware in that scenario, that's what keeps them alive. But that's not a type of mentality that would serve you well in civilian life. You come back and people have PTSD and they see IEDs everywhere or something, or the potential for threats everywhere. Again, it's not the type of mentality that would service you well in civilian life. You have scientific standards of evidence, right? Because a high degree of accuracy is required, you need that type of mentality. You need that degree of skepticism and that standard of evidence within the field of scientific inquiry. Um, Court proceedings are kind of the same thing because the consequences you're dealing with are kind of irrevocable. You're sentencing a man to life in prison. You can't really undo that, or you're sentencing someone to death, right? You need a high standard of evidence, and you also can't be wasting the state's time with frivolous, lawsuits or something like that. So you need a certain, like, you have to meet this standard before we'll take what you're saying seriously, and you have to meet the standard of evidence before we'll sentence someone to blank. So that's appropriate in that scenario. But with regards to your friends, with regards to your everyday life, I don't know if that's something that would serve you very well, right? You could, in theory, have someone who's proven themselves very trustworthy to be a very trustworthy friend, and with regards to that person, I don't think it does that relationship any good to be like hyper forensic whenever anything that person says is just a little bit off. And you can have on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can have someone who's proven themselves to be a liar, like a pathological liar, in which case, like almost anything they say or any story they bring, whatever they attach to it, in and of itself is not enough because, like, they are who they are and they operate how they operate. So you almost, like, in that scenario, you're like, no, I cannot believe you. I need some sort of independent corroboration, right? So again, I don't think you should be arbitrary or hypocritical in your application of skepticism slash standard of evidence, but nor do I think it's wrong to have different standard of evidence for different circumstances, different levels of skepticism for different circumstances, or different mentalities almost entirely, different approaches to different scenarios in life, as long as they're like intuitively correct and maybe morally correct and they get good results. And to be fair, this is the thing, it's kind of hard to decide for another person what is appropriate because it almost has to be quite bespoke. It's quite, I think it's often quite unique to the individual involved as to what works for their life and their environment and their relationships. Anyways, hopefully that made sense. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.